So what's an HTTP then? HTTP is short for Hypertext Transport Protocol. Basically, it's a language used between two pieces of software to communicate, usually via internet. I don't want to bore you with like network kind of lingo, but network can have or has multiple layers of protocols. This one is the uppermost, the one which applications actually use to convey messages between each other. The keyword here is transport. HTTP doesn't do anything else but transport data from A to B. How it's doing, this is kind of important. It's doing using messages. All those messages are basically segmented or divided into two sections, header and body. Header basically tells the target system, this is what you're supposed to do with the message, with the body itself, or this is what you should do, or I'm interested in that piece of information. That's what header is for. If you look into an HTTP header, it doesn't tell you, for example, who's the target system. It only tells you maybe which part of the target system the message is meant for, not really the target. It doesn't tell you an IP address, for example. It doesn't. So in most cases, the access, the OAuth type of thing, or HTTP basic or digest kind of information, the authorization or the identification of caller is usually part of header. It's not always the case, but it's mostly the case. And speaking of, what kind of API authentication methods are out there? Basically, these 5 of authentication methods are the most frequently used ones. You may have something called API key or API token. These ones are usually used in public APIs. That's basically an API which is publicly available. You don't necessarily need to have a login information. You just have the key which you use to authenticate against that API. API keys are usually used to throttle access to it. For example, you may want to limit a key to be called or used multiple times per minute, just because your or the target's hardware you don't want to overwhelm with requests. Up until recently, it seems like these API keys were publicly available. For example, I remember Washington DC metro area transport authority did have public key available on their website. It's not true anymore. They still use these API keys, but you need to register to get one. Similar thing for various exchange rate services. They did have API keys publicly available, just copy-paste from some of their part of website, but it's no longer accessible. Again, you need to register for an account in most of them. There's maybe a couple left, but it's not as much as it used to. Another type of authentication is using HTTP basic or HTTP digest and NCLM. These 3 are kind of similar. they use usernames and passwords, and they send these in a message header. Remember when I was talking about headers are used to send this type of information? It's exactly that. HTTP basic, digest, and NTLM are sending a special header in specific format to authenticate against the target system. There are slight differences in between how they do that. We may probably discuss it after the webinar. Maybe the most important bit here, HTTP digest and NTLM are somewhat more safe than the basic one, and for the matter of fact, it's even more secure than OAuth 1 and 2. The difference between these three and OAuth is the client, the one who's calling for an API, needs to know a login information. They need to keep usernames and passwords so they can authenticate. Which gets us to OAuth 1 and 2 and JSON Web Tokens. With this method, a token is used in authorization header, but the client does not know your username and password. How it's done? Basically, when you have a OAuth way of authentication, the client will request from target, the system where you want to get an access to API, a request for, let's say, authorization key. Server will provide this key to client, and then client redirects user to provider's website where he can log in. After the login, client or the user gets redirected to an application, which then can exchange new information, new token, which was created to basically authorize against the target. So the difference between these HTTP basic, digest, and NTLM versus OAuth way is that with OAuth, you are not providing your credentials to a client application, but credentials are always stored in the application you are trying to get access to. Hope that difference kind of makes sense. But it uses pretty much the same way to exchange data. Again, if you authorize, the client will send some sort of string in authorization header, as well as in HTTP basic or others. Another way, unfortunately, it's sort of underestimated. The only API or the only system I came across using client certificates these days, I found on Azure API Gateway. Client certificates basically use certificates you may know, for example, from an HTTPS world, where you as a person will create an identifier, and then this identifier you are sending with your HTTP requests, again in header. Client certificates are, I think, the best option, to be honest, to send your credentials to remote server. Also, we have the last bit. It's sort of out for topic today. I just wanted to mention a SOAP interface. With SOAP, if you search for SOAP WSS, I think it stands for Web Service Secrets. That's kind of different from all of these, because with SOAP, you're basically sending your authorization information in the message body. this means that you have more flexibility in terms of how you want to secure the request, or the system may tell you what it's expecting, and you have a bit more wiggle space in these SOAP requests. In general, from what I was able to find, the SOAP way, the web service secrets, allows you to more granular approach to authorized and signed messages, and generally are considered the safest option. I don't have any evidence myself. Maybe more research would have to be done, but it's, again, something to consider. Seems like SOAP, WSS, is used in like larger enterprises where more secure way than the others is required. So small notes. One difference between, well, there are small differences. Well, one between HTTP and HTTPS. It kind of shows the importance of encryption. Previously, I was talking about the HTTP message and what is structure. So if we look at the left-hand slide, this bit over here, right, coming through here, is message header. This bit below that is a message body. If you're authenticating or communicating over the internet, you need to keep in mind that anyone on the wire or wirelessly can listen to your communication. Could be because, you know, somebody plays man in the middle and just listening for anything which comes out from your network interfaces, and they can see all this information. For example, if I would be authenticating over the internet, everybody on the internet can know that my login username and password for my Clover server is Clover, because it's going unencrypted over the internet. If I would be using OAuth and I would be already authenticated against my target system, I would be sending an authorization header in here. So whomever can take this authorization header and pretend it's me, because it's sent over the network in plain text. So it's only copy and paste exercise. And afterwards, whomever uses my token, that person can actually make himself appear as me authorized against the target system. So whenever you require some privacy, use HTTPS. The reason being, when you use HTTPS, both of these information are actually encrypted, and encrypted strong enough that person can't decrypt it in a reasonable amount of time. Of course, every cipher is decryptable. The question is how much time or how much resources that person needs to spend to actually decipher the message. Now, that's one thing to consider. If you'd be interested, we can probably after the webinar talk about how HTTPS actually works. It uses both asymmetric ciphers and symmetric ciphers for better performance, you know, that kind of thing. So if you look on Google or wherever your favorite search engine is, you may find how HTTPS actually works and how it encrypts the data which you are transferring between your laptop and wherever you're connected to. Small side notes, I already mentioned that a little bit. HTTP is stateless protocol. So whenever you authenticate against anything, basically you are sending raw data. Everyone can read it. I can read it from my laptop if my colleague would be connected via Wi-Fi and I was collecting information from Wi-Fi connections. So it's pretty simple to get these type of information like credentials. HTTPS is more secure, which is why there's a S in HTTP, but works essentially the same way. You still have header, you still have message. It's just encrypted using cryptographical methods. To be authenticated against something, again, I'm going to repeat myself, you are sending some kind of information. On the previous slide, actually, you could have noticed this JSession ID. When you are authenticating against some system, that system keeps a session, which is essentially a state information for your login or for your current session. If somebody steals this, again, they can impersonate you because as far as target system is concerned, the session ID is the same, and they will treat that person according to session ID. It really depends on the technology the target server uses. With Java, it's usually JSession ID. With PHP, it's PHP underscore ses ID or something like that. But again, it's sent in header as a cookie. Unencrypted communication can be easily intercepted. I've already mentioned that, so not really necessary to dig deeper. Just FYI, only HTTP digest and NTLM are partially protected because they're using nonce numbers and they're hashing the credentials, which is compared against some reference value on the target server. But still, it's not great. It's not a solution. Solution is use HTTPS. If you are like sensitive in terms of who has credentials and who has not, then use OAuth. If you don't really care, use HTTP basic or digest over HTTPS. That's probably, you know, a safe bet if you are on internal networks and you don't care if somebody is using credentials on their client machines. So let's take a look at CloverDX and how it handles different type of authentication methods. So I'm going to switch into my CloverDX designer and run this transformation. So I designed this transformation to accept Google API key. I'm going to show you where you can find it in Google console in a minute. Basically, this graph outlines how different calls can be configured in Clover. So, for example, in here, in these two examples, I'm basically geocoding an address of our Prague office. So I'm using two services in here. The first one is Google Maps, which supports the API key I was talking about at the very first. The second one uses combination of OAuth 1 and OAuth 2. It's kind of weird setup, to be honest. I haven't seen it like anywhere else, but I do like here Maps because they have quite comprehensive APIs. It's just authentication is kind of, I don't know, strange. Basically, how here maps are working is you get OAuth 2 token using OAuth 1, and then you can use that token in general way how it's supposed to be used in a message header. But let's take a look at Google and configuration, how you actually send an API key. URL, it's basically given by the API you want to call, request method as well. So how you use an API key? Usually, you just add it into an address. So something like question mark key equals something. So in Clover, you can do it that way, or you can specify in this dialog here request parameters, one of which is the key. I was prompted when I ran this transformation, an address, which I would like to geocode. So what I did, I just specified request parameters, address, key, and mapped input values into an address. So this can be changed. So I just dragged and dropped on the right-hand side in such way that with each record, I'll be just adding new, searching for a new address. So that's one way. Where you can get this API key, let me just jump into Google Cloud Platform Console. If you're in navigation menu, you will search for APIs and services in credentials. Then you can create a new key where you just copy the value, and that's the one I used when I started transformation. Right, so that's simple enough. With here maps, it's slightly different, but still, again, easy enough. This HTTP connector component, that's, by the way, this one, this HTTP connector, right? With OAuth 1, you just configure usually just these two properties. You define signature method, which is required by the API, and then you're golden, you're good to go. These request parameters, this is actually in documentation of here maps. So where you can get this information? So in here maps, there's a page how you can obtain the OAuth key. So create a signature. So that's this article over here. Basically, they are telling you use OAuth core 1.0 specification to obtain a key, and use client credentials as a request body, which is what we did. Then you can you will get a response with a token, right? So that's what we got over here. We got a JSON document with access token, and then we used it in geocode address. I'll show you later how you can actually put this into an HTTP header. So where you get this information, this information, the consumer key and consumer secret. Again, it's very similar to like any service you may come across. Usually it's somewhere in the console or in the configuration, in the settings. In here maps, you will go into your project, and you will get access key from here. Actually, you will get this only when you create the key. So I'm kind of out of credentials, so I would need to create a new ones, and I would get an information about what's the consumer key and what's the consumer secret. But just copy paste here, and you're done. So simple enough. Actually, one thing, when you get back a response from here maps with the key, you will actually get a JSON document. What you can do in Clover, you can use a data type we just introduced a couple of versions ago called variant. Variant is our structured data type, which you can use to keep any hierarchical type of data. For JSONs, we do have a function which will automatically convert any JSON document into variant. And then you can basically work with it as if it would be any other variable. So, for example, in here, I'm adding, actually, I'm passing the token along. So let's look at HTTP connector. I'll be geocoding. Again, it's a GET request, but small change. I will not be configuring a request parameters. I'll be adding HTTP header called authorization. This is basically given by OAuth 2 standard. With OAuth 2, you need to send a authorization header with prefix bearer and then the token itself. So because I used variant, I can just access that particular field from my JSON document like so. Right, very simple. Then I just map it to my HTTP header along with the address request. Pretty much same thing as with Google. Just small difference with the authorization header. Then let's take a look at how we actually work with OAuth 2 natively in Clover. So if you have OAuth 2 compatible API, it's as simple as specifying a connection to the target system. So how is it defined? In here, I'm using ServiceNow, which is not shipped with Clover, but it's still simple enough to configure. So if you look at configuration, to connections, my provider is generic because it's not one of those natively supported. I have my client ID and client secret specified. Basically, how I set it up, it's very simple. In ServiceNow, I just created an endpoint using OAuth. In application registry, we just created an application for our webinar today. I have my client ID, which I copied and pasted into the field. My client secret, again, same thing. I just copy pasted here. Scope is from ServiceNow documentation, as well as an advanced tab authorization endpoint and token endpoint. So all of these things you can very easily find wherever you are. It really doesn't matter if you're using that embedded provider, which we have over here. So if I create new auth connection, you can select any of these pre-shipped, but those basically only thing those will do is they will pre-fill the authorization endpoint, token endpoint, and that's pretty much it. The rest is really as simple as creating your application and copy pasting from UI to client ID, client secret. Then when you authorize, you will get through OAuth round of authentication. Whenever. So maybe let me show you quickly if I would like to authorize again against ServiceNow. Hopefully this will work. So if I authorize, I'll just use my username and password for the account I have. I'll just copy paste my password over here, and my application should be authorized successfully. And that's basically it. You don't have to do anything else to use OAuth 2, native OAuth 2 APIs with Clover. You will get, again, data, and then you have a bunch of options how you will work with those data. Either you can use JSON extract to basically create deserialized data in a tabular format, or you can go with variant way to basically create a separate variant object represented as a JSON, depending on your use case, what you prefer in Clover. Configuration of this component is pretty much trivial. Just I'll get the number of results, and then I'll just output each result as a separate record. And then finally, HTTP basic and HTTP digest authentication. Pretty simple in here. I'm using Clover DX Service API. Basically, what I would like to do is to run this empty job graph, which is in my project. There are two ways how you can do that. Again, if you have a JSON document, or if you prefer using string as a JSON document, you can build it like so. This is just a string. Or you can do variant. This is the variant object. How I built it, very simply, I just created a map, sandbox code, and job file, filled it with values, and propagated as a variant. This execute job actually called Clover DX Server to run the job. So you have two options. With mapping on this side, it's pretty much the same thing. We are posting to an execution endpoint. These HTTP headers are required by Clover Server. We will find it in documentation, and in here, I'll either use the ready-made string representation, or I will just serialize my variant object into string and send it as a request content, which basically sends exactly the same thing to that endpoint. Again, depends on what you prefer, what you find more convenient in your use cases. To use HTTP basic or digest authentication, it's pretty much the simplest thing ever. We just select desired authentication method and fill in username and password. We currently do support only basic and digest. We do not support NTLM, but I haven't seen much endpoints using NTLM. It's essentially a Microsoft standard. It's used in Windows shares and these type of use cases, like internal to Microsoft. I haven't seen it really anywhere else. If you have, I would like to know if you are aware of any such APIs, or if you struggled in the past in any APIs, just post it in our chat, and we can discuss it. All right, so that would be HTTP basic, HTTP digest. The last bit is using SOAP web service security. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find an endpoint, so I'll just show you how, again, Clover DX Server uses SOAP, and maybe if you'd be, tackling web service security, I'm going to show you how you would do that in Clover. So web service security is, generally speaking, sent in request header structure in SOAP message. So if you would have such endpoint, you can generate the request over here. If you just click, it would show the structure of the request with the security section, and then you can map data into it. Basically, it will work exactly the same as it works with this message part. Click generate. You will get a template which you can fill in with the information. This one just uses a plain text. So this is not very secure, by the way, unless it's over HTTPS. So how to map data into SOAP requests? I'm actually using it in this logout component over here. So if you would like to map maybe some credentials into your request, and it really doesn't matter if it's a message, if it's a header or wherever, you just do this. I'll just regenerate this. And if you would like to send maybe a session token, which comes from Input Edge, just select where you would like to store it and double click, and it's done, right? So this is basically the way how you work with SOAP APIs in general in Clover. So that would be all from mine. I'm looking forward for Q&A. And Kate?
Thanks, Pavel. Yeah, I hope everybody found it interesting. If anyone does have any questions, do just pop them in the Q&A box on your screen, and I will throw those over to Pavel so he has a chance to answer those. As Pavel has on the screen now, we've got a couple of other webinars that are coming up, especially the Clover DX live demo. I'm going to put these details in the chat box. We actually hold these live demos every Wednesday, so the next one is tomorrow. And if you do want to see a little bit more about Clover DX, we call these Introduction to Clover DX sessions. They're kind of high level, how Clover DX works, how you can use it to help you manage your data processes. And obviously it's all live, so you can ask questions to the engineer who's presenting that. So do come along if you want to see a bit more about Clover. And the other session we have there is one we have coming up in this time slot next week, which is about how to integrate legacy enterprise applications into your data pipelines. And I will also just pop the link to that in the chat box as well. And you can find all of these information, all of our upcoming webinars on our website. Our webinar library is cloverdx.com/webinars, and you can see all of our previous ones that you can watch on demand and register for all the ones we have coming up. So let me just pop back over to the Q&A box and see what we have in there. So Pavel, our first question, does OAuth 1 or 2 do away with server-side user sessions in favor of JWT? What is the industry standard here?
Okay, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Does OAuth 1 or 2 do away with server-side user sessions in favor of JWT? What is the industry standard here?
Well, you know, all of the mentions are industry standards, really. Both OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, currently OAuth 1 is mostly replaced by OAuth 2 because it adds more flows, more granularity to what you can do. JWT is kind of emerging. Mostly, if you look into market, if you look into online tools, they tend to use OAuth 2 still. It's evolving. So, for example, quite recently, I think half a year ago, or maybe longer even, authorization code flow was replaced or is being replaced by authorization code flow with PKCE, PKCE, which basically doesn't use any secrets at all, but uses challenges. JWT, on the other hand, from the major providers I've currently seen, maybe if someone else has more exposure to that, I gladly hear about it, because I got a question just yesterday about JWT on a single provider I know of, and that's Google. Google uses service accounts, and to authorize service accounts, they're using JWT signed with SHA 256 with RSA, some algorithm like that. So to answer your question, mostly will come across OAuth 2, and JWT is really emerging kind of formats. I think pioneer is Google for that one especially.
Okay, thanks, Pavel. Okay, on to the next question. What's the advantage of using Clover when modeling an auth application?
So advantage of Clover really is more towards like Clover DX is a data transformation tool or data management tool, which means OAuth in Clover world is more about like get data or send data somewhere, then use Clover to secure an API, right? Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, next question. Any references to REST API context?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what this question means, but maybe the person who asked it in the chat could actually provide a little more context if that would help. But he asked, any references to REST API context?
API context. To be honest, I have no idea what to imagine.
Maybe yeah, maybe if that's your question, you could pop a little bit more in the chat to help what you're asking.
If you mean like REST API in general, I would probably refer you to any search engine. Really, there's a ton of articles about what's a REST API, but short answer is it's an API which uses HTTP protocol to exchange data. Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Tiago asks, have you ever faced any issue when dealing with a long list, maybe thousands of entries, of roles, authorizations for end user authentication against a service? If so, how to tackle that with Clover DX?
Well, if you have in documentation, like ton of scopes which you can use, unfortunately, you just need to read it through. Yeah, well, in Clover, maybe if I would go back into Designer. So if I would create a new connection, right, and I would create a new connection against maybe a Google API, right, with this link, actually for all of our natively supported providers, we do have a link to their documentation where the scopes are mentioned, right, that there's a ton of them. Usually just need a couple. For example, when I don't know, your application needs to work with files, I would look for something like file endpoints or Drive API, right? And then we just copy paste from here into the dialog and separate them by space, right? That's essentially how it works with us, because we don't want to limit on what APIs are doing. So if we would have like search through something and the API would update, for example, then we would limit like people on what they can put in, which we don't want to do. So essentially copy paste. Sorry.
Okay, next question. Does Clover support GraphQL?
GraphQL, if you mean like having a nice point and click interface for GraphQL, no. If you need to work with GraphQL, you can do so. Like most services using GraphQL, they do have an API and they differ in terms of how you authenticate it, or how you authenticate against it. At least as far as I know.
Okay, I think that's it for questions at the moment. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes just to put any final questions in there. No, it looks like everybody is done for today. So thank you very much, Pavel, for your presentation, and thank you to everybody who attended. It's great to see you. And oh, actually, as I say that, there's another question that's popped up. Oh, this is a reply to the previous question who said there are different types of protocol GraphQL supports, such as WebSockets.
Okay, so we do not support WebSockets for now, at least. We do support basically any HTTP call. You can use HTTP connector to that, but not WebSockets. Sorry. In general, Clover is Clover DX is a batch processor. WebSocket, it's more like near real time type of scenario thing. So generally you can do that, but you need to create custom components to do so. So if you would like to create WebSocket connections somewhere and you would like to send messages in near real time, you probably need to use some of these components and basically write Java code.
Cool. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so we will wrap up for today. And again, thank you everybody for coming along. Great to see you. And we hope to see you on another one of our webinars soon. And have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you next time.